Now basically this is what your cover clamp frame system consists of. You have a color code kit, which is actually the last thing we'll use when the frame is completed. Protection pads, which will be used over all the vertical supports, which we'll show you again in the video. Couplings, which connect the tubings end to end. Rubber tips, which go on the end of the tubing to protect the deck. The cover clamp itself. Slide locks, which are used under the vertical supports. And end plugs, which go on the end of each tubing. Comes with an instruction sheet, and basically the tubing is what we use is 3/4 EMT tubing. It can be purchased at any Home Depot or Lowe's or electrical supply. And depending on the size of your boat, it'll determine how many 100 feet you're going to need. This particular boat here is probably going to take about 200 feet that we're going to start with today. It's 27 feet. The system can be used on powerboats, sailboats, small runabouts, up to as large as you'd like to go. Any size boat basically, the system just gets bigger. Tools you'll need is a tubing bender, which you can purchase at a Home Depot or electrical supply. They run around $20 for the head and about $10 for the handle. You can put a piece of pipe in it. The other tools would be a tubing cutter to cut the tubing, a nut driver to tighten the clamps, and a screwdriver to tighten the couplings and the slide locks. A ruler and a marker to mark the tubing, pencil or a magic marker. The first pole we're going to put in place is the first #1 ridge pole. We put rubber tips on the ends to protect the boat and protect us so we don't walk into the edge and get hurt. So we'll put these on. This one we're going to stand on the bow pulpit. Lay it against the bow rail. We'll mark it about 1 foot above the bow rail. What we're going to do is bend this to about a 90-degree bend, maybe a little less, so we come over the top of the windshield. We want to be about 32 inches above the windshield. Now we have the pole bent to the right angle. We're going to install it here against the bow rail with a clamp. When you put the clamp on, have the nut facing in so it can be tightened easily, and the rubber goes between the bow rail and the tubing. The next step is install a coupling with the screws facing down on the end of our first ridge pole. Tighten it slightly. We're going to install another length of tubing. Do is make the next section of ridge pole, which has to come from this section, continue out and bend down, and we want to usually fasten it to a piece of railing or whatever. This particular boat has no rail, so we're going to make our own brace between the handrails of the swim ladder. Now we'll install this brace across the railing. Now what we're going to do is take a length of tubing, rest it on the back of the boat, and with a scrap piece of tubing, extend out the ridge pole, and where it meets we're going to put a mark and bend this. Now that we've bent the last piece of ridge pole, we're going to install it in its position, and we're going to mark it where it meets the end of the ridge pole before it. Install the coupling on the end of the ridge pole. We're going to install our last piece of ridge pole, and we're going to tighten it up. Install the clamp to hold the ridge pole to the temporary brace, again with the nut facing inward. So it doesn't rub against the cover. Now our ridge pole is in place and completed. As we said before, all the ribs are bent at a 60-degree angle. The only one that's different is this first rib we're going to install. This has more than a 60-degree angle. We bent it so it will meet the bottom of the bow rail, and we're going to clamp it in place right here. Take a clamp, place it on top of the ridge pole, again with the nut facing downward, put it under our rib, and tighten this in place. Now we'll count the number of ribs we're going to need to go the length of the boat. The next thing we're going to install is a pocket brace. These go halfway between where the rib leg would go and the ridge pole, underneath of the ribs. So we're going to put it underneath. The next step is we're going to make a rib leg to fit here. Hand up the tubing, John. We take a length of tubing. Doesn't have to be a full length of tubing. It could be just long enough so you have enough tubing to bend, so when it bends down you'll be able to meet this rib. Now you can go inside the railing or outside the railing, depending on whichever application fits best for your boat. We're going to go inside the railing on this one. We're going to rest it here, and where the rib meets the rib leg, at the top edge of the rib, we're going to make a pencil mark, and we're going to bend that at a 60-degree bend to match this rib. Set it in place, and we're going to mark the length to cut the rib and the rib leg. Usually come about 10 inches or so from the bend. We're going to make a pencil mark on each one, and then we're going to cut them both off to match. And this will install with a coupling right here. We're going to install a cover clamp at the railing, again with the nut facing in. Just tighten it up. That holds our rib and rib leg in place. We'll do the same thing on the opposite side. Since we've made two rib legs the same, it'll fit right in place. The next step is to install the vertical support poles, which will stand basically straight up and down, about every 5-6 feet along the ridge pole, depending on where you need it. You look at it, see if you need a few extras. Preload the ridge pole, lift up slightly on it, just slightly, and then make a mark at the top edge of it, like so. We're going to cut it off at that point and install this with a slide lock underneath. And we're going to put a slide lock over the top, slide it down, just tighten it up temporarily. We're going to install this in place with a cover clamp. Just preload it slightly by lifting on the ridge pole and pushing down on the vertical support with your thumb. Tighten the clamp. Then we're going to slide the slide lock right up against the bottom of that. And tighten the screws. This makes it very, very strong. We're going to put another one probably just before the windshield or just after the windshield. Now that we've installed all the vertical support poles, we're going to take out our temporary supports. We don't need these anymore. The next step is to install protection pads over the top of the vertical support poles to protect the cover so it won't chafe. They're going to snap right over the top at this intersection. And the last thing is to install the color code kit, which will make this go together so easy. It's like a dream. Each one is colored differently for a different location. The greens are for the starboard rib legs, starting with number 1 at the bow, working towards the stern. 1, 2, 3, all the greens go to the starboard side. The reds, same thing. Start with number 1. Goes on number 1 rib leg on the port side, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so forth towards the stern. The cover clamp frame system is very versatile. This is a generalization on how to use the system and the clamps you wanted to make it higher, or your boat happened to be higher, if it had a fly bridge or whatever, and you wanted to make a higher frame, the only thing you'd add in addition to this would be a wind brace to the side, which could be made out of a strapping material, is what we like to use because it doesn't stretch, or a rope, a thin cord, which would go from the top of this vertical support down to a stanchion on either side to hold it side to side as a wind brace. That's the only thing you'd add in addition to this if this was a higher frame. This particular frame doesn't need it. It's very strong as it is. We've completed the frame. It's extremely strong. I'm about 170 pounds and it holds me with ease. Thank you for choosing cover clamps as your winter frame system.
The cost of the cover clamp frame system, when divided over its lifespan, about 15 years, becomes the least costly way to cover your boat. Buy it once and use it year after year.
When installing the cover clamp frame system on a sailboat with the mast up, we just made a bend around the mast. So it'll fit just like this. And we'll connect all our ribs on this ridge pole, just the same as we showed on the earlier portion of the video for powerboats. Your cover clamp frame system is easy to store. Take all the pieces that are shaped alike and tape them together in bundles. We're just going to take this one here, put them down. I just store them away.
Another advantage of the cover clamp frame system is there are no sharp edges or corners to rip or chafe a cover. The cover lasts many, many more years.